Some of you have gotten the sandwich. I guess I'll have to wait. Yes. Would you? Am I understanding, because we're all sitting here, that you'd prefer to wait for a little while before you get something to eat? All right. Okay. Let me find my place here. Kenya is on the line. Can we get her where we can hear her? I can't hear her.
How you doing? Good to see you.
Kenya?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
You sound good, Kenya.
And Chris? Chris.
All right, the meeting of the Transition Planning Commission will be called to order. If we could take a moment, kind of take a deep breath and have a moment of silent reflection, and ask for us to do every week for discernment and guidance as we make these decisions. Okay, you have the minutes before you. Do I hear a motion to approve? Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes. Is there any discussion on the minutes? Any changes?
I was present via teleconference. That's what I changed.
All right, if we could make that correction that Dr. Snorelli was present via the teleconference. Any other corrections? All in favor of approving the minutes as corrected, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. The ayes have it, and the minutes have been approved. All right. The next item, just in terms of the chair's report, we got a notice today. We did, all of us, receive an invitation to a reception, a union reception that is going to be on March the 20th at 4:15 at the Teaching and Learning Academy. So any of you who are planning to attend that, if you would RSVP, they're trying to get a count on that. Just wanted to remind you about that. The Community Foundation is having a forum tonight discussing education. They've asked me to attend that, so I'll be doing that after this meeting. We have, I think I told you last week that we do have our second meeting set up with the Commissioner of Education, and that meeting will be with both superintendents and with Chairman Billy Orgel of the Shelby County School Board. So we will be meeting with him, and we'll be having some things that we can share with him that will I think will help him understand how we are moving and help us know if that's in a direction that that the State Department of Education can feel comfortable with. So I think that's about it, and so I'll ask Richard Holden to give us a treasurer's report.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Your documents for your treasurer's report have been included in your handout. We're reporting on the $100,000 that the Shelby County government staked us with to start this work. And we had a report last month with expenses through January 17th. So as you look down the individual expenses on one page, you'll see what's been paid out in the month of February to date. And current balance is still at $98,376.57. We include a second sheet, which basically is a monthly report of how many dollars are coming out per line item of expenditure. So in our budget, the $100,000 can be used for temporary personnel, committee work, information technology, and postage, copying, and things such as the meal we have tonight, which is not in this report yet. But you can see that we had $307 $1,058.16 reported in January expenditures, and then this month we're up to $1,316. I would assume that as we get further along, there may be greater need. These dollar amounts may get larger. So we have 2 pages. One is just simply reporting each expenditure as it happens, and the other is to categorize it by the budget. The other funds that we have are private funds that are being held by the Shelby County Education Foundation, and most of the funds that were committed by private entities are actually in the account. It's a large amount there, but nothing has been spent out of that yet. So as soon as we start spending money, which will be payments to consultants, we will report the expenditures.
Thank you, Mr. Holden. I also just want to, well, let me first say that I believe Ms. Richards joined us. Are you there, Chris?
Yes, I am.
All right. We're glad.
Be listening.
We're glad to have you, and I will say that we've got 2 people joining us, Ms. Bradshaw and Ms. Richards. Both of them submitted some questions through Ms. Brown, and I have them in my possession, and we will ask your questions if they are not already asked. All right? Okay. I also have a number. I'm looking around. There are a number of visitors in our audience tonight that are not always here, and because do we need to approve your? Okay. I really don't know if we need to approve. Let's do this. Do I have a motion to approve the treasurer's report?
So moved. Second.
All right. It's been moved and seconded. Are there any questions? That way we're safe. All right. All in favor of approving that report, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. The ayes have it, and the treasurer's report has been approved. So at any rate, would like to welcome all of you that are in the audience that have not been with us before. We've got school board members, we've got staff from both districts, we've got public officials from our neighboring, all the municipalities, a number of them, and so we're happy to have all of you. And at the risk of leaving people out, I'll just leave it at that rather than mentioning names. We do have 2 large items tonight, but I am very excited to show you or have representatives from Red Deluxe share the website with us. Is Jim? Where is Jim?
Right here.
There you are. Okay. Sorry, Jim. I'm used to looking at you somewhere else. I want to just say that these guys have worked really, really hard. We have pushed them very, very hard, and they've really done a yeoman's job. But, Jim, if you'd like to introduce that, you can. I'll move over where everybody can see it.
Well, we have Stinson Lyles, who's our principal with Red Deluxe, who is here with us to share with us the work that he and his staff have, the work they've accomplished over the last couple of weeks as they've prepared to enable the entire commission to get information out to the community and for the community to have an accessible site readily available. And so rather than continuing, I'm going to turn it over to Stinson.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'm Spencer Lyles. I'm a principal with Red Deluxe, and we've been on board with communications, community engagement here for a couple of weeks. And one of the first priorities we had, as well as the subcommittee had, was getting a real robust website up and running to share information with the community. And while in the past I think we've had a great kind of repository for getting all the information out, I think what one of our goals was to really kind of put it all in a lot more context than it was before. So what you'll see here is, let's see if I can get a little easier to see. So this is the new homepage, and so you'll see we've got a sort of a new type treatment, Shelby County Transition Planning Commission up top, and there's a positioning line under it called Our Voice, Our Schools. And one of the pieces that the threads of context we wanted to go throughout the whole site is to reflect you all's real commitment to listening, to getting a lot of input, that this whole plan is the result of just a lot of people's voices being heard. So the information is organized about history, listening tours, calendar, news, library, and contact, and some big buckets of information if someone comes new to the site, the main things that they would most likely be interested in. So someone just doesn't get dumped into a big swamp of information. There is some way to get through it. You also see this slideshow, Crafting a Better System for Our Teachers, Students, Communities. These are all real photos from both systems. And then the calendar, we'll get to the calendar in a second and see how all the items work. The next 4 items coming up on the calendar are shown on the homepage. And I know you guys got a long agenda, so I won't go through the whole thing. But you see in about, again, this idea of context, listening to everyone to create schools for everyone. The mission, the context, the legal origins of the TPC, guiding principles, commissioners. So you'll see guiding principles here, commissioners. So it's all pretty much the content that you'd expect, the process, the commission structure, each of these committees, the TPC members that serve on the committees, the frequently asked questions that the committee has formulated. So the plan, what we envision on the plan is, and you guys will get to this here in a second, but the key elements of the plan that are either proposed or approved will live in this section called the plan. So at any point in this process, when members of the community want to kind of get a real bird's eye view of where we are, that would be the place where they would do it. History of the TPC, just a very brief legal and legislative grounding. Listening tours, a list of all of them, the input summaries. Want to add your voice? We've got a new email address called My Voice at our Voice Our Schools, where you can email TPC directly. We have someone that's monitoring that daily that will feed those comments to appropriate commissioners or respond with a frequently asked question response if that's appropriate. Calendar. It's pretty standard. It's all the events. It's community events as well as open committee meeting events, TPC events, everything that someone might possibly want to attend. Library is actually one of the things that we were most excited about tackling for this site. There is so much background information and so many presentation decks and so much of resources to get through. Just wanted to organize it in a way that was a lot more user-friendly. So if you get to the General Commission, all of the meeting materials, all of the presentations to the commissions are here in one place, and then the rest of all that stuff is divided by subcommittee. So administrative organization and governance, assessment, so every subcommittee's agendas, meeting materials, and minutes are all here. And each of these library buckets is linked back to the About section that describes what each committee's work is. So if you come to the site, you have a very specific thing you're interested in knowing, you're only about 3 clicks away from it. Learning session videos, all of the stuff that we had originally housed is on this site, but hopefully a lot more intuitively accessed. The last piece I will show you is, again, we've got this new website. We have a new email database. Sign up for email updates, name, email. I am a parent, student, community member, teacher, school staff or administrator, member of the news media. These go into a e-news database that we will be doing e-newsletters to on a fairly regular basis with just updates. So there are a lot of people, the people who've come to the listening sessions, many of them gave us their emails, said they wanted to be kept in the loop. Those people are already in the database. There's the sign-up window here. We're working with both school systems to send out emails to all of their staffs, not to automatically put them in, but to provide them a link to opt into this database. So this will be a real asset for us going forward as we want to get important information out to the community, to have a core database of people who provided their email addresses and expressed interest. So that is kind of a flyby. The committee, Barbara, everybody's got our contact information. I'd love to get emails, calls from anybody with any commentary or questions or anything like that.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Jim.
Yes. Commission members, each of you will receive as it comes down the contact information for the website. And we have a number of these available for those of you who are here today if you'd like to get them. Yes.
I think I got the last one. So.
You got the last one. Are there anybody else here need more? At the table? It's the mayor didn't pass them got stuck in the.
So this is really they did this in lightning speed. Really, there are a few of you that do not have pictures on here. Please get those pictures to us so that we can put them on the site. There are just a few of them. And we're excited about this. So it's going to take us, I mean, they have loaded a lot of information. We're going to see if there are any holes and get those plugged up. But so what do y'all think?
Good.
Good. All right. Wonderful. Okay. Did they leave? Stinson?
No, I'm right here.
Okay. Thank you very much. And this is Lauren Maben, who is also working on this project with us, and they're going to be the hard part, really hard part now is going to be keeping it up to date too, but we're going to do that and you hold us accountable for it. All right, we have we actually have two presentations and they're backward on your agenda. We're going to start with the Educational Services presentation, and we're going to do that for a reason. Let me just explain the difference in these. First of all, we will be hopefully coming forth with our first recommendations and voting on these next week. Two committees have done a tremendous amount of work to get us to these. If you will remember our timeline, the first two recommendations that we spoke about were the educational services priorities in the beginning, the kind of schemata for that plan, and then the organizational the organization of the district, administrative organization plan or recommendation. Tonight, the Educational Service Committee is making a recommendation. They are bringing to us a recommendation for the priorities and kind of a way to look at them. Now, we won't vote on that because they plan to take input that is received tonight and work on that and incorporate that. These are both two very important critical decisions. So after we get input tonight on this particular recommendation, then they will come back with a solid recommendation next time. Yes, sir.
Madam Chairman, did this get sent out for a pre-read?
Yes.
I didn't get it for some reason. And thank you.
I'm sorry. It did, Mayor McDonald. But hopefully you can, again, since we're not going to vote on it tonight, I mean, that's not the best case scenario, but both of these were sent out. One was sent out Friday of last week, the administrative organization deck, and then the other was sent out Tuesday, pretty early on Tuesday. So the process will be, we'll have the presentation tonight, take some input of this educational priorities, educational plan, vote on it next week. The other presentation is the presentation of two models that have been, there is not a specific recommendation yet from the Administrative Organization Committee, but there is a recommendation of two models for this group to look at and to discuss tonight, and to get, there may be some research, some other questions, some things that we have to bring back, and then those two will be, we will bring that to a vote next week also. So that's the process right now. Mr. Pickler?
Just wanted to ask, what role were you wanting the committees to have in terms of the presentation tonight? Because unfortunately, I'm going to have to leave at 6 p.m. for the commitment.
Okay, I think we talked about in your committee meeting that Nika Remmer is going to make that committee's presentation. Did you understand that too, Mr. Jones? Yeah. And that is because there are two, it's not a single recommendation. They are going to be presenting basically the research and the things that we've looked at. The reason that we are doing the educational services first is because that is the structure has to serve the educational plan. It can't be the other way around. We have to look at that, and this is really we have to look at that first, and then look at both of these plans against the administrative organization plans against our services, so that we can determine which, maybe both, maybe one better than the other. We will decide which structure will best serve these educational priorities. So,
My apologies, Madam Chairman, I found it.
Okay. I'm glad, Mayor McDonald, because I tried my very best to please you in whatever I can. And
I like to admit the mistakes when they happen.
Thank you. I'm glad you found it. If you have any staff over here, they can take note of this tonight. Okay. All right. So I'll turn this over. I think on the educational services, this is a recommendation coming from that committee, and I believe Mr. Keel, you're going to start out with that one.
Sure.
Okay.
I think it would be helpful if I was up there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And it's going to be helpful if I move.
Thank you, Barbara, wherever you are. There you are. Thank you. And just first, before I go into any of what the Educational Services Committee has brought together, I just want to note that this wouldn't be possible without a few different groups of people, including the members of the Educational Services Committee, from the TPC, but also the members of the Educational Services Committee from the school district, from the top all the way down, and also with the input of the BCG team. So they did a really good job of helping to compile all of the stuff that we have tried to digest and utilize to create this vision for the high priorities. So the hope tonight is to present some priorities that the Educational Services Committee has come up with. These are, though it's framed on some level as a recommendation, they are meant to trigger a discussion within this body so that we can next week, with some tweaking and with some modification in response to that, come up with something that is able to be voted upon next week. The presentation, there's a graphic involved. The graphic is meant substantively, so don't focus. I would encourage people to focus less on the sort of visual of the graphic, though I think it's pretty good, but more on the substance of what is actually in the graphic. Okay, and so before I go into sort of what we have come up with, I want to take everybody sort of backwards to how the Educational Services Committee got to this particular point. And so, go one more. So our task we have sort of taken in several stages, as I think most of the committees are doing. Our first task was really an information gathering process, and we were, getting input from the staffs of the two districts and from the community, from the assessment committee, from all sorts of places. Then we are sort of at the stage where we are going to take all that in and come up with some big, broad level themes, highest priority recommendations in terms of sort of the big picture goals of the school district, and then use that in the third stage to identify very specific recommendations that would support each of the themes. Okay, so we have we're taking a lot of inputs and gotten them to a point where we have something sort of cohesive from the various places that we've heard from. So what have we heard from? We have heard internally from a survey that the members of the Educational Services Committee were asked to fill out about educational priorities and high priority themes. We have the results of the assessment committee that we heard as a body a few weeks ago that identified a variety of issues that exist within the district and that will need to be addressed by any sort of educational plan going forward. We've got the strategic plans from the two systems. We've got the visioning session, including our guiding principles that we as a body have already discussed. So we have a sense of what we as a body think are high priority educational concerns going forward, as well as aspirations. We've also gotten input through the BCG interviews with members of the Shelby County Board of Education, so we have a sense of sort of what some of the high priorities are from there. And of course, through the listening tour, we have community input. And also through various other mechanisms for feedback, we have community input into what the community would like educational priorities to be. So that's sort of internally what we've taken into account. In addition, we have some external sources that we have used to inform our judgment on this as well. Just briefly before going into the details, some of the themes that came up in the survey within the Educational Services Committee are listed here. And you can see in parentheses how often they came up in that survey. The survey was basically asking, almost in an open-ended way, what do you think are the 5 to 7 highest priority educational needs for the district moving forward? And so you see here a summary of that. And I would also note in the appendix to the deck, there are details of every one of those inputs. So, I went through the inputs, the strategic plans, and the survey, and the assessment committee findings. So there's details about all of those inputs contained in the appendix to your deck. And you can see as we here, just as for example, on the next slide, how these are what we've ultimately identified, and I'm going to go into greater detail, but I just want to sort of point out what this slide shows. These are the themes that the Educational Services Committee has come up with and sort of agreed upon, and these are how the survey results, for example, made their way and fit into the themes. The work has been somewhat fluid. There was a thought that what we would do is come up with 5 or 6 big picture goals or big picture themes, and then come up with specific recommendations within each of those subject matters. But I think as the Educational Services Committee began to work through it, it became clear that it was a lot more interconnected than that. And so what we've come up with today is, in fact, a lot more interconnected, and I think will, to the extent that this is something that is approved by the full TPC, will help our work going forward in terms of coming up with recommendations to support that interconnected model. I'm just going to go through a couple of findings from the assessment committee that informed our judgment. There's more detail in the deck, but some things that we really took into account are the wide variance in student population needs throughout Shelby County, including the high concentrations of economically disadvantaged students. We have mobility and attendance and graduation rates varying widely across the schools, and in pockets we have extremely high mobility. That's something that is informing our judgment. In addition, a significant number of lower income children not participating in any sort of pre-K programs. So that's a finding from the assessment committee that helped inform our work. There is work to do for every school within Shelby County. I think that that's something that we were very conscious of, and that we need to be conscious of delivering a program that will work for every single student within Shelby County. Okay, so this is what we came up with, and I'm just going to walk through it briefly, and I want to note that on the 2 pages following this, I guess that would be pages 9 and 10, are more detailed and specific definitions for pretty much every word on this graphic. So, for instance, there's a definition for every child ready for school and for every student, and so on. So, a few things to highlight from the beginning. The ultimate goal is up here at the top, a world-class educational system, 2013 and beyond. And you can see in the definition for world-class educational system what we mean by that. Every student will experience an education that meets or exceeds international standards for excellence, and every student will graduate prepared for an internationally competitive workforce. That is the sort of biggest picture of the vision here. And the idea, early childhood was something that came up repeatedly in the listening tour. It came up repeatedly in the survey results. It's certainly a finding from the assessment committee. It's something that the strategic plans pretty much focus on. It's pretty much present in every input that we addressed. And the idea here is that we begin with every child ready for school. This is thought, not just as a responsibility of the school district, but a responsibility of an entire community. So we have under this entire graphic supportive community members and partners. So there is an acknowledgement that the school district can't do everything for every child from 0 to pre-K, and we already know that there is a deficit in the number of students who could use pre-K and don't have access to it at this moment. So it's intentional that we have a supportive community, and this is just one example in which a supportive community might be helpful to have us achieve our goals. I'm going to skip over the wheel for a second and take us to the other side. So we have every child ready for school, and the tail end, and this is something that, college readiness and career readiness was something that came up fairly regularly, and we felt like that was an outcome that we were aiming for at the tail end of the work of the school district. And so every student ready for success in college and career, and focusing in on not just able to graduate, but able to graduate ready to succeed in their next endeavor. College readiness didn't seem to quite capture the breadth of what we hoped to accomplish, but rather ready for success in college. So now, the middle part is the sort of core work of the school system, and what we've tried to do are, in a way that is responsive to the feedback that we've gotten, what we know about best practices, what the school districts are already doing, come up with some broad themes that will guide our recommendation-making process going forward. The first thing to note is that in the center of all of this is the concept of for every student. And the idea is that every student has potentially different needs and is going to need different levels of inputs from within the wheel. But the idea is every student should have some sort of, the system should be responsive to the needs of every student, wherever they live, wherever they are ability-wise, etc. Okay, so now walking around the graphic, and these are not in any particular order, and the colors do not mean anything hidden. There is no hidden meaning to the colors. But we think they are all equally important in the grand scheme, in that every one of these must be present in order for the school system that we are helping to create, in order for it to succeed. So I'll start just where it starts. Engaged parents, and noting again that the definitions are in there, and I'm not going to read them all for you. Culture and climate of high expectations. Effective instructional leaders, focusing mostly on principals and school-level leadership, effective teachers, rigorous implementation of standards, tailored interventions and support, quality and accessible educational choices. And again, each one of these can be taken and added, for every student, right? So engaged parents for every student, culture and climate of high expectations for every student, and so on and so forth. Again, just one other addition to note, this is down here. I'm just reiterating that this is down here, and that we feel like it's part of the mission of the Transition Commission to sort of identify that this is a requirement both to engage the support of community partners that do things like early childhood education, just as an example, but also to give the broader community a stake in the success of the school district and ultimately for every student. So the community should be invested in the success for every student. I think that's about the level of summary, and I'm hopeful that this is a starting point for a broader discussion.
Okay, so let's do have some time to discuss. I think that, again, just to put this in context, these are the priority areas. They will guide, and if they are approved, they will guide the further recommendations that will come forth from this committee on specific areas. And working with the Educational Committee, there are about 40 or 50 specific 44 specific items, and in looking at this schemata with the committee, they felt like that they fit somewhere in all of these kind of priority goals. So let's just open this for Mayor McDonald for discussion.
Yes, Daniel, there are things on this wheel, and you said it two different ways, so I want to kind of nail you down on which way we're going to say it. First, you said that, this was kind of the responsibility of this new school system, and then you said these have to be in place for the school system to be successful, and those are not exactly the same things. So if we acknowledge them as having to be in place, which I can do, that's one thing. If we say we expect the schools to do these and the school system to be responsible for these, I've got a problem with probably 3 or 4 of these being the responsibility of the school system.
So, as a practiced law professor, I would answer the question by saying, well, because since we're at an input-taking phase, how would you, and I think it's implicit in your question, how would you like us to read it between those two?
I think it's attainable if we say these things must be in place for this system to work. I think for it to succeed, we can say that. I think if we say the other, we're setting ourselves up for failure, because I don't believe we've seen an example of a school system that's been able to get all of these different things within the system itself.
Right. So, I think that's how I read it, and so to the extent that I presented it otherwise, in that this was the responsibility, like someone on staff at the school district must be responsible for any of these things. I'm not sure that, and I'm speaking really personally because I think that this is an open question. I think anybody on the educational services or on the broader TPC can step in with their own opinion on this. But I think the second thing you said, they all must be in place in order for this to be successful. That is sort of the vision. But I think that the school system, though maybe not having the responsibility to, quote, do all of the things, should create a culture in which it works toward getting those things done. So, for instance, engaged parents. The school system can do some things with engaged parents, but a school system can also be intentional about working with other groups that might even do a better job of engaging parents. And so I think that when we say something like engaged parents, there is some responsibility for that on the school system, but there is responsibility on a supportive community partner, on the student, on the parent.
Can I help out just a minute? Because
Yeah.
I think we'd all benefit from. Mayor McDonald, could you just be specific about the things that you have comments about, and then I'll recognize Ms. Avery.
Yeah, Daniel touched on one of those, the engaged parents, culture and climate of high expectations, the intervention and support. At least those three have to have some community input to be successful, because with the whatever limited resources we have in education, I don't think we have enough resources to do all of those things, nor can we force parents to be engaged. And, really, when you look more towards these definitions as opposed to just the statements here, I think that spells it out even better, that this has got to be a community effort, and you've got to have faith-based and civic-based and other organizations that are stepping up to see that this happens, and not just expect it to be done by taxpayer dollars in an education system.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Avery?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mayor McDonald touched on some of the same issues that I am concerned about. Engaged parents. In the Norman Rockwell world, every parent is engaged with their children's education. But in the real world, many of the parents are not capable of helping their children. Are we going to look toward the churches, retired teachers, to be mentors to those children when they get in the first grade or kindergarten? I think these are some of the things that we have to realize, that the parents are not always capable of helping the children. There are grown people that cannot read, they cannot write. If they read, they do not understand what they're reading. So we have to realize that. That's one of the issues that we have to really delve into and make sure that we have the commitment from the churches, any other area that we can get people to be mentors to our children.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Dr. Johnson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As Daniel has pointed out, these simply happens to be our broad themes. Each of the 44 areas that have been addressed will have specific recommendations in terms of how we hope to get there. We understand exactly what you're saying, and I too would envision all of those entities being involved in the process to help us achieve it. Unfortunately, the situation that you've described does exist, and I think it is our responsibility to work diligently to try to find ways back to the partners and the support systems to help us achieve our goals.
Dr. Green?
The way I looked at the diagram, I looked at it in three phases. Phase one is a purpose phase. This is the purpose of our work and where we think the system should go. Then there would be a second phase, which would be a process phase. And then the process phase would describe how we would accomplish the purpose. And then the third phase would be the outcome, which is every student ready for success in college or career.
Okay, thank you. Other comments about Mr. Jones?
Thank you. I had a question on slide number 5, and this was the one where there were the 10 high-level themes. And so my question is, what are we to read into the fact that there were lines without checks? So, for instance, the quality, accessible, engaged parents, supportive community members, and partners, if anything.
All right, you're asking now somebody. Daniel, did you hear?
I did.
Okay, can you respond to that?
So I guess he's saying, just to rephrase or repeat the question, on that slide, if you go, for instance, from engaged parents and you go across the survey responses, there is no check on any of the survey responses, so it wasn't something that showed up in the survey that we gave for the educational services work, but that was only one of a bunch of different inputs that we took into account. So, for instance, if you look at the guiding principles that this group came to, then parent engagement was part of that. If you look at the strategic plans, so up there now is the various inputs that were taken into consideration. The strategic plan of each district does take, parent engagement into account. So this slide 5 is just focused on, where they show up in the responses to the survey. I'm going to see there might be a slide that has some checks. Is there another one with Jamie? You know the one I'm talking about? 12.
I'm going to answer that one.
These categories don't exactly match the themes that we ended up, but this was an interim check, and parent community engagement, like Daniel mentioned, is a big part of both the strategic plan and part of the CCC vision.
If I could mention, just make a comment about this, because just having sat on that committee, in a sense, I think the appearance of those two not only are because both districts attended those, but are very much because of the truth in what Mayor McDonald and Miss Avery are saying, that the committee recognizes that these are both areas, parental involvement, as well as having the help of the community, that are necessary. But if we left them out of our priorities, then we would not give attention. There are a number of recommendations that could be made that have to do with the community and things that could come from them. So I think in a real way, it was both the acknowledgement that these things are very necessary to truly get the results you want, and also that they are, while we may not be able to do everything in those areas, there are some things that can be done, and we can certainly make recommendations to those two very critical areas.
Well, that was just two of them, but and I sort of follow you, but I also look at great leaders and effective teachers, and those had just one. And so this, this may not necessarily guide our work. I was just trying to reconcile and have a better understanding of this, because I feel that when we do talk about effective teachers, great leaders, every student successful in college and career, that should be something that we aim to have an effect on.
Well, I think that on page 4, there may be just some error, because teacher effectiveness was one of the top 5. So I don't know why the checks are not there, but that was survey results too, was it not, Nika? Yeah.
Madam Chairman, who are
I'd
the
just like to make
survey-
one comment regarding the survey. It is non-scientific, number one, and it was restricted to members of the TPC committee and the staff members that are working with it. So it's
And
not broad-based.
if I could just add one other thing in response. So early childhood was the top vote getter on the survey. And I think that there's an acknowledgement within those of us who helped put this together that there are real limitations in terms of what the school district can provide, especially 0 to 3, and probably 3 to kindergarten as well. And where do if the school district isn't able to do it, parents and community would seem to be a way to support the work of the number one vote getter, early childhood, and so that's another way that they made their way into the conversation.
Ms. Stanton.
I just have a question about the definitions under tailored interventions and support. You mentioned special needs, special education, ELL, students performing below grade level, but there's no mention of behavior interventions. And since I worked for 20 years in that area, I think it's a fairly important area. I don't know if everybody else agrees, but it seems to be it's important. It's someplace else that I just didn't see.
No, but
The expectations, I think, is what
But that could easily be, that could easily be added in that definition. It needs to be.
Or if, of course, it could show up in the recommendation.
Right.
The recommendations that'll.
Okay. Other comments? Ms. Stanton, did you finish?
Yes.
You did? Okay. Mr. Paget?
Again, Dr. Johnson said this was a non-scientific survey, but perhaps as a member of the Ed Services Committee, we might be wise to consider getting together with the TPC representatives of that committee to review these survey responses, because as they appear, it appears that page 5, it really, really doesn't look clear, in my opinion. It is survey responses, but I would say that it would be the responsibility of the Education Services Committee, Mr. Keel, the members that are on the TPC, to get together and sunshine the meeting and have a discussion about the results of that survey, Madam Chair.
Okay. Mr. Hart? Yeah.
Is that separate from what we did on Monday, though?
Yeah, we did that.
Yes.
Just as a matter of information, the TPC committee did meet on Monday, the Ed Services, the whole committee, and looked at that. And again, the survey was one item, and many of those fit somewhere in the wheel. But that actually did happen. The TPC in full committee did meet.
Not the full committee.
No, I'm sorry, the full educational services.
Well, the full
We
committee,
have-
committee did meet and
Right,
discuss
but
this.
When I said
Right.
full committee, Mayor McDonald was thinking about the full TPC. The
Oh,
reason I
yeah.
said that, Mayor McDonald, is because the Educational Services Committee is divided into 3 subgroups. So there's a full committee on Ed Services and a full committee in here. Are there some other comments, Mayor Luttrell?
I guess it's just for clarification services, going back to what Dr. Johnson said. Are we saying that these determinations were made as a result of the survey of the committee plus staff? Is that what you said?
Yes, and but this was only one entity,
Yeah.
Mayor. I think there was a slide that talks about all of the inputs that were used. Not here they are. There are many inputs. The survey was just an informal way of getting reactions among ourselves.
If there was ever an area that cried out for citizen input, it's this. I don't see citizens input.
Yes, all the input from the listening sessions.
Is this coming from the listening tours?
Yes.
Okay. For an example, back to the parental element, in a listening tour, a parent made the recommendation that activities should be provided for teaching parents how to help their children. So, yes, there is parental input. Maybe we're covering a wide area, not as much as we would like, but based on our timelines, we are including all components as we receive these data.
And I would just note on page 19 and 20 is within the appendix is a summary of the information some of the information that is related to Ed Services that made its way from the listening tour into this process.
There are some very specific recommendations or comments from the listening tours also that fit into some of these, like choices, and but almost in every listening tour we heard about high standards, keeping standards high. We heard about different needs of students. We heard about having to have good teachers and principals, parents. I think these. They may have been more. We had some more specific inputs too, but these were present in those. Dr. Green.
I hear three major concerns from the group. One, it addresses the authenticity of the survey, the reliability and validity. I hear another concern about parental engagement, and I hear a third concern about community partners and involvement. It would be helpful to me to understand what do we need to do about those three areas.
Mr. Hollert.
I want to give us a caution here about the prism we may look at or look through at some of these. While I am a rabid supporter of the combination of parental involvement and community involvement, because sometimes it takes more of the latter than it does the former. But through 5 generations of my family, I'm not too sure that there was ever a common language from each generation to the next generation. With the first one in my family, a 6th grade graduate, the next one a high school graduate, and the next 2 college graduates, and the other one's still in school. And so to me, that 6th grade graduate, my grandmother, she had a real challenge of being able to communicate with my generation when we were in school. Because technology, and just think, technology in the 60s, that word wasn't invented, was it? But the changes that happen in education. Now, an aside, I would mention to you, if we could outlaw one thing, it would be acronyms. I hear now from my children who are college graduates, they struggle trying to understand what the school system is saying with them with that acronym. Mm-hmm. Now, they dig through it, and it takes a little bit to do it, but anyway, thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Boyd, did you wish to speak here?
Hearing some of the comments, I'm reminded of a really extraordinary meeting we had with students from across the community last Monday evening, when a couple of hundred students gathered. In the comments from the students, I think were particularly telling. In response to what I see in terms of what's desired, I heard students specifically ask for effective teachers and how important that was to their education. I heard them talk about the importance of the leadership in schools in terms of effective instructional leaders, and talked about how important that was. One student in particular responded with regard to rigorous implementation of standards, how important it was not only for him and his particular school to have high standards of expectation, and said he mourned the fact that he hadn't received those, and how much he desired to have a more rigorous standard expected of him in terms of his performance. The other students spoke, and so I'm struck by how responsive this particular diagram is to what we heard Monday night. Quality and accessible educational choices. They talk specifically about having the opportunity to make real choices about challenging coursework, AP classes, or whatever we wanted to call it. And they were there recognizing how important it was for their parents to be involved and to participate in the life of their education. That was just one particular evening. It happened to be about almost 200 students from across the community who were sharing those. And there was a lot of commonality because we heard from a lot of students. I would just suggest that in many ways, this is really an extraordinary sort of symbol for us of kind of where I hear from the community they would like for us to go with regard to a school system that serves all our kids all across the community. So I'm pretty impressed with the work that I see here that the committee's come up with. I've seen a lot of these from other communities because of some other work, and I think this is really a helpful piece.
Thank you, Jim. One of the things that I would, Mr. Holden, you go ahead of me. Yeah.
I just wanted to make a point. I agree with Jim, Mr. Boyd, that I think this is an outstanding piece. But we're getting hung up on the fact that we have a survey by the Educational Services Committee among its own members and thinking that that's what's driving this work.
Right.
It's one very minute piece of the total work, and it's unscientific, but in an effort to provide total transparency to their work, they provided all of their input. They did the survey. It would be wrong not to include it. But the rest of the work, the inputs that generate the 10 pieces there, to me appears outstanding, and I think it's a good job. I don't want us to get too far off task focusing on one survey that's not the main part of the work.
Thank you, Mr. Holden. One of the other things that I wanted to share with you, too, is particularly on the tailored interventions. And while in a broad sense that is an area that we can call on the community for, that was one area that the educators on our committees, the Learning Committee particularly, was absolutely adamant about, that because there are different needs that we had to have or to really recognize that interventions, tailored interventions, needed to take place with children throughout their educational career. And this was both from Shelby County educators as well as Memphis City. In fact, there was very little that the educators disagreed on. I mean, I think I've told you that a number of times, and this is very true. And so these, we talked about special ed, we talked about STEM education, we talked about art and music, we talked about a lot of specific curriculum, a lot of specific things, and they all seem to fit in one of these wheels. But in terms of that interventions, just because the educators are not on this committee, I felt like I needed to mention that, because this was something that they, both districts have good interventions. They really do have very good interventions in place, and they shared that with us and the real necessity of doing that, particularly given our assessment data and looking at the varied needs of our students. Somebody else had their hand up besides. Okay, I'm going to go back to Mayor McDonald. I saw him first, and then Mr. Jones, and then Mr. Paget.
Well, just to help me make sure I'm on target for what this committee is asking us to do and what the next step is. If I'm understanding the presentation correctly, if we agree that this wheel is inclusive enough and not too broad or whatever, then page 24, where those 44 items are, would be your next step to trying to be sure that basically this is the litmus test against which these 44 things would be tested. If they don't fit into any of this, then they don't go forward. Am I?
I don't know that they don't go forward, but there will be things that we come up with very specific recommendations for, that will ultimately come to the full TPC, and then there will be things that we recommend, that the staff have a process for merging operations or coming up with, and so I wouldn't say that they necessarily fall completely outside of the process, but I think you've accurately stated that the point of this is to get some sort of agreement from the full TPC that this is consistent with what the full TPC imagines as the educational vision for the merged district to guide the Educational Services Committee as it comes up with its more specific recommendations, that will ultimately, each one individually, be considered by this full body.
And so, if I could
yeah,
continue
sure.
with the question. Obviously, in a room this size, we probably could come up with a list far greater than 44, and some of these are strictly headings. So there would be a lot of sub-issues underneath these 44. So, if... I'll let the others speak. And then
Could I just respond?
Yes, please.
Mayor, you're exactly right. The list of 44 is evolving. It does not mean that there will not be others as we continue our research and make recommendations. But again, the whole idea was just to come up with broad themes under which all the major issues for the type of school district that we are envisioning can be placed.
So that the work would have, as Dr. Green actually said, a purpose, so that rather than just a group of 60 recommendations, we could look at those. But I think you actually characterized that pretty much the way the process would go. Did I say Mr. Jones next, and then Mr. Padgett?
And I wanted to apologize for getting us bogged down on that first
okay.
survey, but and thank Mr. Holden for really capsulizing everything. I see this slide here really as just our framework,
exactly,
and almost our guiding principles for the Education Committee. And there will be, as you alluded to, Mr. McDonald, Mayor McDonald, some things that are on page 24 and some others that will pretty much fall under those umbrellas, for instance, or in those individual buckets. Now, are we to, and this is sort of almost to beg the question of Mr. McDonald, are we to add things or to give our suggestions of things that will be included? I don't have any, but I was just, didn't know whether we wanted, whether this was the opportunity to do that. But I just, just for the, just wanted to reemphasize, this is I see this as our framework before we get too bogged down and say,
exactly,
well, we need to change this, we need to change that. This is just a framework of which
exactly, and I think that it says to us we need to look at the programs in both districts and the best practices on how to ensure that principals are strong, because that is, and we'll be making recommendations around how to have effective teachers, whether it be compensation or whatever. So it is a framework, very much so. To your answer about the other question, I think that your input is important tonight. We did this in the committee, and the chairs are here. We had this framework and changed some words and all, but this is a result of this committee has been meeting weekly, spending a lot of hours, most of which has been looking at the current state of the districts, looking at the curriculum, looking at the programs, looking at teacher issues, support issues, and so forth. And so this is a compilation of a lot of that work. Mr. Padgett, and then Dr. Smurelli.
It goes to what Mr. Holden said. I still think, Madam Chairman, that on page 3, internal TPC Educational Services Committee survey, I'm a first-line reader, and I go along with the gentleman to my right. Perhaps we might best say that survey was unscientific because the public seeing this might rush to some conclusions. Yes, sir, I understand that, but it needs to be there because this document sits out there in the public, and I just think I might have looked at that internal as assessment, Memphis City Schools or something, but the TPC Educational Services Committee survey needs to be listed as unscientific, because when you look at it, as Ms. Stanton said, I didn't see something on that checklist. Sure, it frames our work. I agree. It does frame our work. But at the same time, we have people reading our documents that are not a part of the process at this table nor in those committee meetings. And we would not want to turn these charts loose without some type of an explanation, because once they begin to look at those explanations, they're going to formulate conclusions with limited evidence where we could have been clear without the jargon, Madam Chair.
Okay. Dr. Smurell, you wanted to respond to that, and then
I think that's a great point.
Okay.
And perhaps even reordering the list of inputs, would be helpful. But I think we do need to be conscious that this is something that is going to be put out there as sort of how we got to our work. And I guess I would just note, if two of the inputs were TPC Visioning and TPC Ed Services Committee survey, the survey maybe is closer to the visioning than that we did, as a group. We put the dots and all that stuff for the guiding principles. It's probably closer to that than to a quote survey.
So we'll try to clear up
Yeah.
what that is. All right, Dr. Smurelli.
Okay, just a very, very brief comment, hopefully to help to clarify how we got to this point. I think with the Ed Services Committee, we did have three subcommittees, as Dr. Prescott alluded to. There was a teaching subcommittee, there was a supporting subcommittee, and there was a learning subcommittee. Those three began to report out, collect data from all these various sources that we list here, and as the reporting occurred, there seems to be a commonality that we were envisioning, and we sort of came to a fork in the road and said, okay, what is the commonality that we're envisioning based on these three subcommittees of this Educational Services Committee? And that's how we did this informal survey, for lack of a better term. We came to a fork in the road and said, what are the commonalities that have emerged? And so we basically surveyed those individuals who had listened to all these commonalities, and that's how the wheel was developed. Here's their input, here's the output, here's how we get to that point. And so that's how we sort of arrived at that. So this was just, the survey was just one very, very sort of fork in the road as we decided how to move forward. And that's how we got to this point. It's just sort of a clarification how we got there.
Any other, Mr. McDonald?
Yeah,
Mayor McDonald.
That's okay. Keith, whatever. So, for instance, as I started out with, I am concerned when I look at the 44. I see item 40 says parent and community engagement. Some of these other things go clearly into these wheels, and they're pretty hard and fast. This is still warm and fuzzy. But that being said, I think, as I said earlier, I believe in order for us to accomplish the best educational system we can, whether someone would agree that it's world-class or not, maybe the best that we can accomplish, it's going to take as many engaged parents as we can get, and certainly the outside partnership for those children who don't get the parental support. Now, one other comment. If I were, for instance, STEM, is that something you're going to put as a sub? Because we talked about it, but I don't see it on the list. So would that be...
Dr. Johnson?
Thank you very much, Mayor.
You're his best friend now, Mayor McDonald.
I've argued that point over and over and over. If you notice, as we looked at the information from, and I hate to mention the survey anymore, it seems like it's gotten us a little
Don't
off
mention
track.
it, Fred, don't mention
But
it.
if you will note the next item, there were two items, one dealing with technology and STEM, and both of them received 6 votes, and they're related. So I agree with you. STEM education has got to be at the forefront, because the nation's growth and welfare is tied up in STEM education for the future. My colleagues on the committee assured me that don't worry, that it could be adequately handled in our wheel, and I reluctantly yield. Thank you.
Oh, you just don't know, Mayor McDonald, where you. But I will have you note on the definitions that particularly was mentioned, and that kind of got to be a place with we needed a framework, and rather than put each of the items. However, you can expect to see a recommendation on STEM education because it's very much discussed in that committee.
That being said, I would make a motion that we accept the committee's Wheel of Fortune. I'm sorry, Wheel of Education, yeah.
Well, that motion has been made. Our intention was to wait until next week, but if a motion is made, then I will have to ask for a second. Is there a second to that? There's a second to that. Is there any other discussion?
I would like to amend that with Katie's recommendation to add behavioral intervention to the definition of intervention.
Thank you.
Very
I
good.
saw Daniel making notes while I was talking,
Yeah.
so I wasn't going to say anything else.
All right, the motion has been amended. Now, I'm going to have to get back to my parliamentary procedure. I think we have to vote on an amendment before we vote on the motion.
Making the motion can accept the amendment.
Would you accept that?
Well, it's really, that's outside of the wheel. That goes to
Okay.
another issue in my mind.
It's
that's
going to
not-
be added.
Yeah,
It'll be added.
I'm certain, I don't see how that negatively impacts my motion at all.
I think we're on the discussion on the motion.
I think the question is, are we voting just on the graphic, or the graphic plus the definitions? And Katie's comment relates obviously to the definitions.
Correct.
So,
Well, we
if,
won't.
if that's what if it's the will of this body that we include the definitions in the motion, the maker is certainly willing to have that.
All right.
Be a
Having
part of
said that, then it is well taken that we will add or the motion has been made that we add Katie's comment to the definitions. Since that motion has been made, is there any discussion on that particular amendment?
I've accepted it as a part of the main motion.
All right, then that's done. All right, now more discussion on the main motion. Any other discussion? Mayor Luttrell.
Originally, this was planned for vote next week.
It was.
Why was it planned for next week as opposed to tonight?
Well, really just in deference to this committee to be sure that everyone was ready for the vote. And so that certainly could still happen, but having had the motion made then and seconded, then that can be part of the discussion.
If it's the will of the body, I have no objection, but I certainly would love another week to review this.
Okay. Other discussion on that?
Yeah, I think some of the definitions, I came prepared to tweak some of the definitions.
Okay.
I don't think the definitions have been refined to the extent that we could accept them as they are written now. For an example, I think we need more discussion on supportive community members and parent involvement. Some of our schools have large parental involvement, and some have very low. And some of the statements, I'm concerned with including equity into some of the statements, and I just don't think we're ready to vote tonight.
Okay. That we're still voting on. I mean, we're still discussing this this motion, but we are hearing some comments, discussion around whether or not to move forward with the vote. Other.
My question would be about the other contents of this committee's report. And so, as I take the motion to be, we would be approving just this in the definition. And I'd have a question about everything else that's contained in.
Okay. The actual recommendation, just to clarify, that will be either approved tonight or next week is really the wheel and the definitions. The rest of the information in the packet are background information trying to show how the committee arrived at this. So that really is the set of definitions, and the schemata here is what this committee will be approving at this time, correct?
Pages 8, 9, and 10.
You are correct, pages 8, 9, and 10. That's what the motion is, Mayor McDonald.
Well, then I mean, that's why I started out with just this other part.
Right.
And so I'm wondering, Mayor Luttrell, if you could support just the wheel and the arrows and maybe we voted on the balance of it next week. If we separate, I mean, I can separate the motion back out to where I started.
I guess I would just respond to that. What's the rush? I mean, it was planned for next week to give us time to kind of absorb this and deal with it. Why is there something compelling about getting it done tonight that you couldn't wait a week?
Only in the timeline we have is so aggressive. Anytime we can move forward, I think it's important for us to do it.
Okay, well, the motion is on the table, but again, we can continue to discuss it. And admittedly, the original plan was to vote next week, but I've accepted a motion because it came to the table.
Can you accept the substitute motion?
Oh, my goodness, y'all are going to really
That
try
we wait until next week. It was originally agreed that we would wait.
Ms.
It was originally agreed.
Ms. Avery.
Madam Chair, actually, you could ask if Mayor McDonald would withdraw his motion and withdraw your second, and with no objection, go next week for the vote.
Yeah,
Mayor McDonald, do you have any, how do you respond to that?
I'm certainly trying to just get some things done, not create. We have plenty of controversy that we're going to talk about. This doesn't need to be one of them.
Correct.
So I will gladly
Okay.
withdraw.
But before you do, Mayor McDonald, I was just going to add, if we don't see anything changing in the will, and if anything, separate his motion, and then we come up with the definitions, or Mr. Holden's part of the amendment to the recommendation would be more so part of the definitions, as opposed to what we're calling here the framework.
All right. Mayor McDonald, are you willing to separate the motion? Or you're willing
I'm
to...
willing to go to do either one. Okay. You know, I'm just a team player tonight. You know?
All right. All right.
But now, if anyone, and here's my thing, if anyone wants to add anything to it, would this not be the time to do it? If not, we vote on it, and then next week we take a look at the definitions, and there are things that we can add to the definitions, because if we talk about STEM could be under the bucket of quality and accessible educational choices or rigorous implementation of standards.
Can I just then kind of move this to look at, to see if I can take the pulse of the group? Is there any objection to the wheel or taking that vote tonight on the wheel only? Is there we have one objection to it. How about the...
I believe we're under Robert's rules here.
We are.
And until the minutes are approved at the next meeting, this item will not be final, and it could be brought up for reconsideration at that time. So realize that we may be mixing concrete, but we're not curing it tonight. And that being said, I would encourage us to take action, because from what I'm hearing, our challenge really is in page 9 and 10, not page 8.
And in our next item, too. So, well, we still have the motion on the table, and I'll look to Mayor McDonald just to ask you what you wish to do on that.
I'd like to hear, Mayor Luttrell pull the microphone in front of him. I'd
Mayor
like to hear
Luttrell.
what he has to say.
We have spent way too much time on this issue, and it's not going to solve the problem of the merging school systems. So, hey, vote for it.
Okay. All right. Is there any other discussion on Mayor McDonald's motion, which is we need to clarify whether it is simply to accept these 10, kind of 11 actually this schemata of priorities, bringing back the definitions next week to look at.
Yes. Basically, I would withdraw the motion that I agreed to and go back to my original, which is only page 8.
All right. Is there...
We accept.
All right. Any other discussion, Daniel?
I'm in favor of the motion, and I would just encourage, I would like to have just as much time spent on getting feedback on the definitions
Correct.
as we have spent in determining, what precisely motion that we're voting on right now.
What
Because I think that would be a lot more useful.
And what I'm going to ask is that everyone around the table will forward to Dr. Johnson and Daniel and/or any comments that you have on definitions so that they can compile those and bring that back. All right?
Madam Chair, I'd just like to point out that we meet on Monday afternoon at 1 p.m. If we could get your input prior to that time, it would be very helpful.
Okay. All right. Well, democracy is a messy issue, but we're going to. Would you wish to do that? Okay. Thank you. Then all in favor of approving. This would be the first recommendation of the TPC to adopt this model for our educational plan and as priorities. Page 8 on the materials that you have tonight. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. The ayes have it, and we have approved this set of priorities. We will bring back the definitions next week. The next item on our agenda, thank you for your participation on that. The next item on the agenda is the administrative and organizational and the administrative organization of the district. Now, on this one, this is to look at these items and to be given the information on them. So we're going to have a presentation from Nika on this. Anyone that needs to take a break or get food, do so, and she'll be up here.
Can I have it on my lap? I think that's going to be
I wasn't expecting a motion, but it came. Oh, mercy. I hope we don't have one on this one. I don't know what I'll do. Better not.
Right. Hey, Mayor. See, that's what happens when I don't get my stuff where I can be ahead of time. Yeah.
Sure. I'm supposed to include in my story tonight a mention of the letter from the suburban mayor to the TPC that went out this afternoon. Barbara said she hadn't seen it yet.
I don't know that it's gone out yet. Mayor Goldsworthy's kind of the quarterback on that.
Oh, okay. It was characterized to me, I haven't seen it either, but it was characterized to me as asking the TPC to include the municipality's right to educate children in unincorporated areas.
Something like that. Again, I would refer you to Sharon,
okay.
but she has the actual document. I don't.
Okay.
But it's something like that.
It didn't sound like something that TPC could do to me, but maybe I misunderstood.
Yeah. Just check it.
Chair McDonald, we don't have time to do this next week.
That's why I wish I'd have seen that before. I'd have read it, and then I'd have known we're not supposed to be making motions tonight. I'm just trying to move this thing down the road.
Because, I mean, it's really simple. But I just want to say, I think it's
Oh, no question. Trust me.
I said that Billy, Bobby Duncan.
I saw you.
I didn't see you, but I saw you.
I saw you when you were leaving. Yeah. All right, I'll try to be quiet.
Please don't. No.
I'm going to tell them I've been muzzled by the chairperson.
I want to thank you. I've been trying to tell them that God
Yeah.
Like, I just call it.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear somebody else say that. Thank you. The board looked good tonight, man. With as much as y'all know. Kind of like the board. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. No, she said we wouldn't have enough time for me to talk this next time. I thought I was doing a good thing. I didn't know it was going to take us 30 minutes to get to a vote on it.
thank you much for moving that forward. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah, how to do it. Yeah, exactly.
I don't know if they think mine's all out of order, but I think that they might have meant this to be in there, but I think they're right. Just kind of. And that came through.
Well, now that would be a reason. That would be a reason.
Go ahead. I'll let you know.
All right, if all the TPC members, if you want to get something in the back and if you can come to the front, we still have another important presentation. If all the TPC members could please come and take your seats. All right, the next presentation is not a recommendation. It is really introducing us to two structures that are pretty complicated. So we're going to have the presentation. We're still going to, we may run over a little bit if I have to be somewhere at 7. And I'm just going to have to read my Robert's Rules of Order again, so you guys hadn't tried me on that until now. But I do think that we made a good decision, and we continue that next week with our definitions. But right now, we have a presentation regarding the administrative organization and models that have been studied by the committee. All right, Nika?
Thank you, Barbara. So, similar to Daniel, I just want to start by thanking everyone who's a member of the Administrative Organization Committee, both the TPC members and the staff members that have worked for weeks, reviewing best practices, joining us on calls to interview individuals in other districts on. Can you not hear?
Yes, we're working on that right now.
All right, thank you, Kenya. We're going to try to turn up that volume.
So let me change my.
Do you know?
I feel like I was getting an echo, but I'm going to change mics. This one. Is that better, King? Ooh, I guess so. Again, I just want to start by thanking the members of the committee for joining us on benchmarking calls, for reviewing the research, for reviewing the summaries that were provided in the research, and for engaging in a very active dialogue in determining the models that are being presented to you today. As your chairwoman has stated, these models are being presented as two potential models, both of which are believed to be by the Administrative Services Committee to be models that can work to deliver the Ed Services Plan that we were working in conjunction to, that you just discussed, and both of which have strengths that are detailed in here, and both of which have challenges that you will be able to think about proactively and therefore mitigate to a very large degree. There were actually there was another option that was discussed, debated, and decided not to bring forward to the committee to the full commission by the committee. And so, again, that just reinforces in my mind the fact that the committee has determined that these are two that are worthy of consideration. And the reason that we are having the conversation today in some where it's presented, and then you have quote-unquote soak time to think about it, to consider what questions may not be fully answered today, to submit those questions, and to think about what it would take to be able to enact this here in with the merged Shelby County School District. We have time before next week's vote to do that. So I am going to go through the materials that are in front of you. These are the same materials that were presented as a pre-read on Friday. I am not going to go through every page or even close to every page of the materials, both because of time and because they were presented as background to provide you with some of the story of how the committee got to the recommendations. I'm sorry, got to the options. But I will go in detail through the options. It's important to note that this was done at this time in conjunction with the Ed Services recommendation, because together these two recommendations will inform the work of many of the other committees. Also, similar to the inputs, to the various levels of inputs that we had on the Ed Services Committee, we also had multiple different inputs that were taken into consideration for this work. A reminder of the guiding principles is on page 10. And the aspirations that the Administrative Services, the Administrative Organization Committee actually started with is on page 11. Those are two things that we just encourage you to keep in mind. We also, at this committee, took into consideration the community concerns that came back from the listening sessions, and on page 12, just highlight the ones that specifically had to do with the admin structure that we heard during those listening sessions, because they were a part of getting to these two recommendations. The page 14 in your document talks about some of the external benchmarks. So the document actually goes through the fact that we have multiple different inputs, again, similar to what we had before. First of all, there were the internal inputs that we just discussed. We have external inputs on benchmarking, where we actually spoke to district leaders in 5 different schools that are working with one of these models currently. And some of those were actually joined by one, never more than one, but one member of the Admin Services Committee. We also talked to nonprofit leaders and to other BCG experts in the education space, so that we could get a broad purview of what's being done in other places in the United States currently. And from that research and those best practices, those best practice conversations, if you turn to page 16, 2 models emerged from that. 2 models that these are not specifically the 2 models that we're presenting. There's actually alterations of both of the models, but these 2 models are important for us to stop and pause on, just so you understand what's happening in other places right now. One being what we call the center-driven strategy model, where if you think about, who could be the provider of public education, what specifically is the role of the center, what level of school-level autonomy is available, how is the organization structured on a geographic basis, and what's the community accountability mechanism, as 5 key dimensions. The model on your far left in the yellow talks of the center-driven strategy model. It is one that focuses more on the left-hand side of each of those, not far left on every dimension, but more on the left-hand side of each one of those dimensions, because it's more about having a strong center and driving a strategy from that strong center. The alternative that is emerging is a highly decentralized portfolio model. In your pre-read, I'm sure you saw there's quite a bit of information about the purest example of the far right portfolio model, where you have a system of schools instead of a single traditional school district, where you have a very, very small and lean center that's focused primarily on performance management and measuring results. You have autonomies granted to all schools in the district, and many schools that are autonomous that operate outside of any geographic or regional patterns with appointed boards. That is being done as far right as possible in New Orleans right now. So those are the two general models, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the learnings that we took from those models before I talk quite a bit more of the way that we think about a model that is closer to the center-driven strategy model for Shelby County versus a model that is closer to the decentralized portfolio model for Shelby County. Although I would emphasize that neither of these models, exactly as described here, is what is being presented, because we wanted to take into consideration, again, what we heard from community, what we heard from you in your visioning and your aspiration process, and what the administrative org structure committee was thinking about. So there were tweaks to both of these. Neither, we didn't take all of the right or all of the left. To start with, page 17, again, I'll continue to reference what page I'm on because I'm skipping several of the pages, again, because they were provided for pre-read, and I know that you can review them. The full set of materials are available on the brand new live website. So for anybody who wants to access it, they can do that as well. But the successful center-driven models, so the far left model that I described, have several commonalities that are worth noting. Some of the benchmarks of this are Gwinnett, Hillsborough, Charlotte-Mecklenburg, who I know you've had a learning session with. The importance of these commonalities of what is helping these particular examples, which are high-performing examples. There are also examples of this model that are not as strongly performing currently, but the ones that are performing very strongly and driving incremental student achievement typically have a focused strategy and sustained attention on a small number of priorities, and those priorities are about student achievement, something similar to what we just discussed and why it's important to pair this decision with the decision about ed services. They have had these districts, when we look at them in retrospect, have had stable leadership. Some of them have had the same superintendent for 10, 15 years. That allows the district to build towards a strategy and not change strategy with every leader, and that has allowed that strategy to be executed with success when it is necessary to execute it to a large number of schools. These districts have prioritized equity of opportunity, and with a deep expectation of a commitment to high expectations for all children and assets that are leveraged differently to benefit all of the students in the community. Several of these have used weighted student formula, which Charlotte Mecklenburg I know described to you as well, to talk about not just the dollars following the students, but a differentiated dollar following the student. And despite the fact that these districts are center-driven, they still have a theory of change in these successful four about principals empowered to be change agents. And so there is principal autonomy over staffing within the teacher union rules, but typically within some autonomy over staffing, and in some cases, although not nearly to the same extent, some autonomy over budgets. That said, regional superintendents in this model supervise the principals or support and manage the principals, and that provides a link back to the central office. So that's the extent of what I wanted to highlight on that one. There is, of course, more detail on some of the specifics of these models of this model in the materials. I will say that the difference between traditional schools and portfolio schools, then, if you turn to page 19, is about the fact that instead of having one centralized school system, the portfolio model thinks of itself as a system of schools as opposed to a school system, where the government or the LEA is the sole operator in the traditional centralized model. The LEA is an authorizer, and there are multiple different operators in the portfolio model. And instead of thinking about this school is a permanent investment that will always have all of the control or exist in perpetuity, the schools, not the buildings, but the schools are contingent on performance in the portfolio model, meaning that if a charter is given and performance is not achieved, then that charter can be revoked and can be given to someone else to operate within that school because the performance expectations are not met. There are approximately 25 districts currently that are using some element of this portfolio model, including Denver, which is pretty far along in it, multiple years, and New Orleans, which transferred to this post-Katrina and has had very significant results that are detailed in your material, so I won't go into the specifics of it. Instead, I'll just highlight on page 20 a couple of the elements of the full portfolio strategy. And so page 19 just describes some contrast of a center-driven model versus a portfolio model. Page 20 then gives some of the distinctive elements of a portfolio model. And again, putting this out there as the far extremes, and then we'll come back to what the two options are in just a moment. Distinctive elements of the portfolio strategy is the importance of options and choices for all students, because you have the system of schools. It's thought of allowing and enabling that. You have a very high level of school autonomy, where the schools control staff, selection, assignment, their budget, and many other things that they wouldn't necessarily have discretion to control within a centralized model. There's a pupil-based funding system where the dollar follows the student, and the amount of budget that each individual school has control over depends on, obviously, their student population. And the talent-seeking strategy is about how the charter operator or charter management organization, if they have multiple different schools, thinks about recruiting new principals, new teachers, and the performance-based retention and pay that is typically involved in that. I will say also that there is a requirement of this, again, because the schools are granted a charter in return for accountability. You have a performance management process or performance-based accountability in number 6, where you have common performance standards, high level of performance standards. Individual schools can follow different pathways to reach that, but they are held accountable for those end results. And if they do not maintain those end results, then they do not keep their charter past the contracted period. And these are thought to allow extensive community engagement and a feedback loop because they are controlled closer to the community. So my guess is that there are lots of questions about both of these models. Before we get into the questions about these extremes and benchmark models, I'd like to talk about the models that are actually being put forward to you to consider for consideration for Shelby County. Page 28 just touches on some of the academic research. I know there's lots of conversation on can big school districts actually deliver high quality results. I would say is similar to what a specific quote in the SES consultant materials for the municipalities. There's tremendous level of mixed research on school size or on district size being correlated to student level performance. It is not only mixed, I'd say that it's not currently determinative. So you can't say a big district can't deliver high student achievements or that a small district will automatically deliver student achievement, because both of those you've seen the opposite occur. There's some specifics here. We've got the research that's quoted here if anybody wants to read some of that. But point being that we are very, very committed to creating something that can work for up to 151,000 students, which is what the merged district would be, and that we believe that both of these could do that. So let's talk about the options. Before I get into the specifics of what's different, page 37 actually talks about what's the same. Both options that we're presenting for you for your consideration and your vote next week would be geographically based in regions as a starting structure. Both options would also, however, have schools that operate outside of the regional structure. So on the left of this page, we would recommend approximately six regions, not the exact regional structure boundaries, but you would want to think of something that's aligned with the current 4 regions of Memphis and splitting Shelby County schools into 2 regions, just so you have approximately equal-sized regions that are better managed at the break level for the regional superintendent. This would maintain your feeder patterns, which is something that was an important consideration, as well as create a sub-scale, a sub-district of the appropriate scale to be able to manage the principals, as we've seen in best practices. In addition, on the right side of this graph, of this page, you'll see that there will be, regardless of which option you choose, many schools that operate outside of that regional structure, just based on the current state. You currently already have some charters, and in both Memphis City Schools and Shelby County Schools. There are charter applications that are that are at the state level. We don't know how many that would be, but the point being that there are other charters that could be opening by 2013. We also know that there is the ASD that is coming, and the innovation zone that is contemplated. So by 2013, you could have, by 2014, so more implementation of the ASD and the innovation school zone, you could have up to 112 of your schools operating outside of these regional structures, regardless of which of these options that you choose. And so that's something that you should just think about in consideration of both options. So then on page 39, we actually talk a little bit about the 2 options that are being put forth from the committee for consideration. The first being the united option, which we would suggest is a well-managed united system, which is similar to several of the benchmarks on the far left in the centralized model, would have the highest degree of regional cooperation. Because of that regional cooperation, you'd have the likelihood of faster implementation of proven practices. When you have a practice that you want to implement across the district, you can do that relatively straightforwardly. You can strategically allocate your resources, whether they be programs or people, across the district where they are needed most, and have greater consistency, as well as the ability to drive economies of scale for the things where that makes sense, whether it be in the central office or in transportation, logistics, a lot of the things that are coming in a couple of weeks, because you have that level of scale. Again, important to note that even in this option, you'll have some decentralized elements because of the schools that I just spoke about. And in contrast to that, United Path, you also have the path to autonomy being presented, which would allow there to be schools or groups of schools that join together, apply, and are granted autonomies from the regional structure, with the thought that when there are schools or groups of schools that are closest to the constituency, they can respond very rapidly to the needs of their students and communities, and they would have high-level performance expectations, so they would only be allowed to continue to do that while their performance expectations are being met. But if they are high-performing schools, to have the similar autonomies to some of the autonomies that are being presented to ASD schools, but also allow incremental innovation and allow those schools to do things that wouldn't necessarily be granted under the United model, with the knowledge that all schools wouldn't necessarily want this level of autonomy, and so there would still be the regional structure within this, that schools that don't apply or are not granted the autonomies that the path to autonomy option gives you, those schools would still be governed similarly to what the governance would be under the United model. Okay? So just a visual of those is on page 40. Important to note that at the very bottom, the relative decision-making authority, with the darkest being the primary decision-making authority, where the primary decision-making authority is, and then where secondary and relatively limited decision-making authority exists. With the point being that on the United model, primary decision-making is held at the central office, and strategy key decisions are driven from the center. the regions have a limited decision-making authority in that they are primarily there to manage principals, and there can be some managed autonomy for principals at the school level, but again, secondary to the central office on that option. And Path to Autonomy has the primary decision-making authority for what's happening at the school or group of schools level. So where it says school on Path to Autonomy, that could also be a grouping of schools that have come together for some reason and applied together. This is not the pure portfolio model that New Orleans is referenced as an example in your documentation, because it's not thought that all schools are going to eventually follow this path to autonomy. You would still have some schools that have a similar regional structure to the United model, but the autonomous schools are operated by a not-for-profit and have a governance that would be at that school or group of school levels, not importantly, an appointed governance at that school or group of school levels, not just the governance provided by the central office. Central office would be the secondary decision-making. Similarly, because it is very similar for many schools to the United model, the regional office, this is still a lean regional office. There was a decision made at the administrative committee to minimize cost and duplication at the regional office level, and so that's why these are the two that were brought forward. So what does experience and research say about these two models? Page 41. The United model has many of the elements of the traditional model. They have many, and some of this I've already mentioned, they have many examples in current U.S. education of both high-performing and low-performing districts within this model. High-performing ones we've mentioned a couple of times. And the common traits of those high-performing districts, which obviously would be traits that we would want to replicate if we were to choose those, are thoughts of that focus strategy and sustained attention on a limited number of priorities as opposed to many, many priorities. Principals still empowered as the agents of change, although they don't have the same level of autonomy. The experience and research in the Path to Autonomy model, again, is relatively new, but has some very promising results so far. The most developed of the models that are going in this route today are New Orleans and Denver. Happy to give you a little bit more information about those later, but New Orleans currently actually has 80% decentralized that are operating outside in that system of schools concept, and they've shown great success in narrowing the proficiency gap in the last 5 years since this has been in existence. This was the model that they went into post-Katrina. So pre-Katrina, they were something more along the line of the centralized model. Post-Katrina, this was the way that they chose to stand the new district up. And in addition, there are other districts, as I mentioned, that are pursuing this route right now, and it relies on a contractual agreement, and it's similar in charter schools in that way. And I'd say that it would likely take the route of charter schools here in Shelby County. Pages 42 and 43, I'm not sure I'm going to go through because my guess is that you've either read them or will read them in advance of next week, and I'm conscious of the time. But I will say that Jamie and I will be sticking around even after you close the meeting. So if there are questions that we can answer today or questions that you want to raise today, even after the close of the meeting, we will take them and we will come back to you with the answers to the ones that we can't answer. Some of these are going to be design choices that after you choose one, you're going to have to detail further. But we'll continue to answer those questions. That said, I do want to take a moment and pause on page 44 because as you read this later and read it the second, the third time, which I'm sure several of you will do, and the members of the Admin Services Committee have already done, this is an important slide to take and soak for a moment because it really does talk about how the decision-making authority differs between the two options. So to start with, there's the fact that there are three different colors in any column. Those three colors stand for what the board or central office has decision-making authority for, what regional office has decision-making authority for, and what the school in the gray color has the decision-making authority for. And you'll see a bit of this is just because of the things that we've detailed. Everything's not on there, and this is not written in stone yet, so this is something that you could change even after you decide it. But the concept of there's more that's controlled by central office and or the board in the United model, very little that's controlled in the regional office, and the autonomies that are automatically granted to schools are around teacher hiring and staffing, providing the school level budget, day-to-day school operations. That's always owned by the school. But for example, the way you think about curriculum on the United model is owned at the district level. The alternative would be the path to autonomy, where you have some schools that are operating as the district level and similar to have exactly the same, but other schools can apply for and be granted additional autonomies to do many of those things many of the authorities coming up that list. And so more is controlled at the school level. The way you think about school and classroom interventions or curriculum is something that if you were granted the autonomy, then you would be able to do that at the school level instead of at the district level. And that said, for me, it's always, like, that was a bit of a visual, but it's easier to think about. It's also important to think about what does the whole visual look like. I will say that on page 45, your visual looks a little bit different than this one, because this is an overlay slide, but there are certain things that are, again, the same in both districts, in both options. Both options have the Shelby County School Board having a superintendent. There are 6 regions in all likelihood. There's an Office of Innovation that owns the Innovation Zone and likely has a dotted line to individual existing charter schools. And there's the state running ASDs. That's true of either option. That's the extent of the United option. The path to autonomy option would add this middle piece. And it would add the ability to have new charter sponsors of a school or a group of schools that would also report up, have a dotted line relationship up to the Office of Innovation. But that's the existence of these schools and what autonomies, how you apply for and grant the autonomies to the schools and what those autonomies are is really the meat of the difference between these two options.
Nick, can you repeat that, please?
So this,
No.
yeah, I know. I'm gonna go through the whole overlay. I'm gonna go through the whole overlay though. This exists in both options. You have ASD, that's gonna happen regardless. You have pre-existing charters. We would recommend that you have regions to be able to create the scale breaks and the feeder patterns for schools that do not want the autonomies of the path to autonomy. So this is true of either option. The difference between them is the existence, the pathway, and the autonomies that are granted to these schools or groups of schools. And it's a meaningful difference, by the way, but that's really the difference because of things that have already been decided, because of your current starting point, there are things that are going to be true of either model. Daniel?
I just want to make sure that I'm understanding that change. The new schools that just popped up with the change, some of them may come from the left part of the regular regional structure. Others might be newly created and newly approved charter schools.
That is correct, and it's a very good. It's a very important distinction because we would say that some of this would be about your current Tennessee charter law allows both new charters and charters as conversions of existing schools, and so conceivably you don't need 6 regions because you have more schools in this and you want to get to the same scale breaks, and so you have 5 regions. But the concept of regions and those would still be there. But yes, it's a very good point. Some of those dots could move into these yellows. Some of the blues could move into the yellows.
Let's talk about process a little bit in terms of continuing this conversation. Obviously, we had too much to do in one night. I think we did get the order of it right, even though this is quite interesting and very, very important. You really need to look at these models in terms of how they can deliver those educational priorities. So it's 20 minutes until 7. Nika, would you mention this worksheet that you've got here and explain and talk to everyone about that?
Great point. So on pages 50 and 51, we have listed out a blank worksheet for your use. Well, today and throughout the week coming into next week, for you to consider. What we put on the on the left side was the guiding principles, right? And aspirations. Oh, these are the aspirations of the admin organization. I apologize. For you to consider which one of these models in your review of the materials is better suited to be able to address the different aspirations of what we were looking to do within an admin services, within a new admin organization, within the governance and the management, much of the management of which will be detailed out later. But for you to think about and take notes on, maybe ask questions about which one of these two models that are being presented for your consideration are best able to meet each one of these. Each one of you, I know, has a different prioritization about what on this list is more important or less important, but I think that this is a good organizing framework for you to think about those consider that.
So those items on the left were developed in the Administrative Organization Committee based on our guiding principles and aspirations. And the question was asked, what would we want the structure of the district to be able to deliver? And so those are the answers on that left. And then there's a worksheet there. It's just some direction from the group. It is, like I said, about 6:45. We could begin to ask some questions. We could forward our questions. We could stay until 8:30. Y'all can. I have to go because I have to speak somewhere, but that's okay. We can proceed as we desire. Now, one of the things is that we do have out of the way for next week now the vote on the schemata of the educational services, although we do still have to take up the definitions, and we don't have to get this done. We hope to get it done by next week. So what do you wish to do at this point? Do we want to digest this? Do you want to carry on? If we could digest it. All right, in order to do that, let me ask you to be responsible. All of you are responsible, I recognize that. But if we could get specific questions to Nika and or to Jamie to Nika, then they can prepare those and get them out to us ahead of time of next time. Now, the Administrative Organization Committee has been looking at this, but this is different, and so the rest of you, I'm sure, have many, many questions. But I think it will be important to get those out so that we can have the questions answered ahead of time. Staley? Sure.
Sorry to drag things on, but this is more of an ask as everybody kind of reads this and thinks about it over the next week. Because one thing we talked about in our committee till everybody was tired of hearing each other, I guess. One thing I would ask is that the way these two models are framed are really only in educational terms. So like Nika mentioned, it's relatively new, this path to autonomy. New Orleans is a very striking example, but it's kind of held up as, well, it's one of the few and it's an outlier, and so this is kind of an unproven, untested thing. I would ask you all to think about, though, if you're not just looking at an education bubble, but if you're thinking about your business or a government or a nonprofit, this path to autonomy, as we're calling it, is nothing new and is nothing unproven. That is where most really high-performing organizations have ended up. So I would not only evaluate them both as like how do you set up an education system compared to how the rest of educational systems are set up, I would think about, most companies have kind of discarded the all central power where we have to have a superstar CEO and it's all command and control. So that is a pre-lobbying comment, but I can't.
Well, I'm glad you recognize that, Mr. Gates. Martavius.
If we could go to slide number 41, think something that needs to be, think it needs to be amended in a fashion. When we look at path to autonomy, it relies on contractual arrangement between the district and the schools, as in charter schools. That entire part there currently exists under the United as well. So I don't think that that's something that's exclusive. That's not anything that's exclusive to path to autonomy, because we have charter schools right now, and they operate on a contractual basis.
I just want to clarify that point because this came up in our committee just to make it clear. So he's right. So currently, charter schools in Tennessee, or public schools, are allowed to convert to charter schools. That law exists. It hasn't happened with any real frequency. It's happened twice in the state. And so this is not just about what's legally allowed. This is about encouraging and embracing a philosophy of management and support for greater charter schools and public schools converting. So I just want to distinguish, you're right, that it's legally allowed today,
Right.
It's legally allowed tomorrow, but there's a difference between what you sort of embrace and what's legally allowed.
But the point that I want to emphasize is that the way that it's presented here, one, if the reading public were to go out, and as we talk about, these documents are in the public domain. When someone who's not versed in this, when they look at it, they could very well think that, okay, well, the charter school portion is not available under the United. And now, not just for our edification, and this committee will know that, but if those who are not on the Educational Services Committee, looking at this for the first time, not having the benefit of the discussions that we've had, go home, look at this material tonight, and say, oh, okay, path to autonomy, charter schools part does not exist under the United.
Why don't we do as we said in the previous example? If you can put some, just really the explanation that you've just given, that this is a structurally embracing that, and noting, as Mr. Jones has said, that legally this is available at this time. I think that can, as you say, clarify
Right.
for the.
But also, let's see, that was 41. Actually, I skipped 40. 40, the schools or group of schools may apply to district for charter school status. That needs to be under the United front as well, because when we say United, most similar to current MCS, SCS models, the fact that schools or group of schools may apply to district for charter school status right now currently exists under the United model that we have right now. And so even from that, even when we go to the part on 45 where we had that, the difference to the path of autonomy, 45. And so even when we had the path to autonomy to appear, that path to autonomy, that part can exist under the United as well.
Right.
And so the committee members, I don't know if the TPC members who are not on the Educational Services Committee see this, they don't know that same model right there can exist under the United.
So,
and so that's the point, this clarification that I wanted to make.
I agree with the clarification, and we can emphasize that that's possible. I will say that you actually have to structure it differently in what you provide at the central office, because again, on this page, because central office has different is dark versus light in terms of the way that you're structuring and how the magnitude of the number of schools you expect to be under path to autonomy, how you think about providing support services, how you think about the contractual relationships, the number and scope that you're going to plan on would actually change the way you do things in central office.
What I think that what you're talking about, Nika, is that while what you say is absolutely correct, Martavius, that there are some legal avenues for everything to happen that is under the first one. These are neither one of the structures that are available. These are new ideas that this group would either endorse or not, one or the other, and embrace. So, in other words, if, for instance, the system wants to acknowledge that they exist but not embrace them, then then they fit under one, and then the other is really just more saying this is what we want. So, I mean, I think you're absolutely right in pointing that out. But I think that the point here is that these models are presented as a mindset or as a way to move forward. So that's the decision we have to make. Richard?
Thank you. Madam Chairman, I'd like to place a personal comment in this, as Mr. Cates did. He lobbied for something that he's pushing for, and I heard you say that you were that we would be looking at one or the other. You may not have meant that, but you said that. On our worksheet, we're looking at which one provides this, which one provides, and as you go down the worksheet, I did a real quick look because I did the pre-read, and within about 2 minutes, I was able to make some check marks based on my pre-read. I'd be looking at some combination, not one or the other, and I would encourage my commission members to consider that.
Okay, I think that's a good point, and these are things that we can talk about more in detail, I think, because the reason these are before us this way is because there can be combinations. I mean, these are suggestions. These are the ones that are brought forward, but you will be able to discuss them and other variations. Mayor?
Well, I was just going to really support what Richard said, because as a member of this committee, I think the discussion all along has been a blend of the two, and you're right on target. I think your sentiments are right along with those of the committee as well.
So what we might also, if as you pull together your questions, you may also want to pull together your ideas that have been expressed. And again, we didn't think we were going to vote on the wheel tonight, but we did. And we may think that we'll come to this conclusion next week, and it may take another week. But both of those are important, and there was a good bit of consensus in the first round. So we have two good things here to work from. It's exciting to have these before us. But I think that the best thing to do now, and I'm really asking you to get those questions to these ladies ahead of time so that we can at least start with those answered. And then next week we will be able to spend just as much time as we need on discussing these. And if we're ready, then we'll still work toward being able to come to a consensus or vote.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
So can I say that any questions that we receive by Monday, we will complete and return back to you by end of day Tuesday? That doesn't mean you have to stop asking questions, but I want to give you, again, some more soap time with the answers to the things. So we'll package what you've given us by end of day Monday to get them back.
I mean, many people already had questions. We had questions in from Chris and from Kenya, so I'll turn those over to them. I can't tell y'all enough times how much I appreciate the attention and time that you're giving to everything that we're doing. It's serious work. It's important work, and you guys are serious people, and I really appreciate that. And we'll come back here next week, and everybody can lobby at that point. We'll just and do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right. The meeting is adjourned.